Thank you for joining me today as I tell the story of an amazing woman who happens to be a distant relative of mine. Her name is Jane Haining, and I spent 7 months researching and discovering her life story, which I've been sharing around the world in talks and in schools and in many different venues, because the story has been having an amazing impact on the people who've heard it. Now, just to introduce myself, my name is Lynley Smith. I'm a teacher and a journalist and now an author of a book which is called From Matron to Martyr. This book tells the life story of, as I mentioned, an amazing woman who happens to be a distant relative of mine. And she is so remarkable because she actually gave her life for the Jewish children in Budapest during World War II. Her story is a powerful one, a poignant one, and it is, as I say, impacting people's lives in this day and age, 70 years since her death. Now, I want to put this story, first of all, into a perspective of today, because it's all very well to tell a story about something that happened in the past, and we can learn some lessons from that, but this story has got a much more important point to it, in that it is actually has become very, very relevant to the situation in Europe and around the world today. So to put the story into a modern context so that you can see for yourselves why I'm telling this story, I just want to take you on a little tour around Europe, and we're going to visit a few countries, and I'm just going to very briefly explain what is happening politically in these countries in Europe today. We're going to start with Greece. And in Greece, there is a party called the Golden Dawn Party. That party is an extreme right-wing nationalist party, and that has been described as very similar in its behavior and in its attitudes and what it believes in to the Nazi Party in Germany before and during World War II. This is of extreme concern in Greece and in, of course, across Europe. This party, according to the Prime Minister of Greece last year in 2013, had about 20% of the vote of the adult population and 25% of the vote of the young people in Greece. That's a quarter of the young people in Greece were supporting this party. This party does such things as march around in uniforms which look very similar to the Nazi Party uniforms in Germany during the war. They carry swastikas. They are somewhat militant, and they are of great concern politically in Greece. Moving on now to the next country, which is Egypt. Now, Egypt, last year, in Egypt, the group in control of Egypt in the government was the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood were pushed out of power in July 2013, but before that they held power. Now, I just want to read to you a statement that was put on the web, on the internet, by a man called Fatih Shabib, who was the top Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood official and chair of the Culture and Tourism and Information Committee, and he was basically the head of oversaw the party's state-run newspapers, so he was the Minister of Propaganda, if you like to think of him that way. Just to note that the Muslim Brotherhood is really a sponsor of Hamas, which has power in Gaza at present and is considered by the United States and many other countries as a terrorist organization. Now, this man said this about the Holocaust. He said, "The myth of the Holocaust is an industry that USA invented. USA intelligence agencies in cooperation with their Western allies during World War II, created it to destroy the image of their opponents, which is, of course, USA, etc., and the opponents to Germany. He also claimed that the 6 million Jews who were killed, who were supposedly killed in the Holocaust, actually moved to the United States, and that the real number of Jews killed in World War II was about the same as those killed in traffic accidents. Now, I'm sure most of you will never have heard that before. It's a very interesting fact coming out of Muslim Brotherhood and gives you some idea of the level of information that is being fed to the Egyptian people, that was being fed to the Egyptian people and is still being fed to many people around the world. Now I want to jump now to Sweden. We're doing a hop all around Europe, but gradually you'll see that these things tie together. In Sweden in November 2013, they were commemorating a very special event, the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was the night in 1938, the day in 1938 in Germany, where the German people rose up against the Jewish population, and they smashed the windows of the shops. They did anything they could to terrorize the Jewish people, burnt their books, etc. Now, the Times of Israel reported in November last year, this is what happened. A few hundred neo-Nazis marched through Stockholm with their Greek allies, the Golden Dawn Party. Now, I have to ask, what was the Golden Dawn Party doing there? They marched legally with police permits. A significant number watching were waving Hamas flags. And I have to ask, what was Hamas doing there with the Golden Dawn Party? The paper goes on to say, the day of shame, the solemn anniversary was being hijacked with official permission by two extreme opposite parties, extreme opposite of the spectrum, who were united by only one thing that they have in common. That was the hatred of the Jews. Now let's jump across to Hungary, which is actually where much of my book is based, because the lady I've written about, Jane Haining, spent 12 years, the most important 12 years of her life, living and working in Hungary. So let's have a look at Hungary today. Currently in Hungary, there is an extreme right-wing party which is named Jobbik. The Jobbik party in 2010 gained 16.7% of the seats in Parliament. The first time since World War II that any extreme right party has gained any seats whatsoever in the Hungarian Parliament. Hungary had another election in 2014 in April, and that percentage rose to 20% and is increasing all the time. The popularity of Jobbik is increasing all the time, which is giving people a lot of concern. Now, let's jump to another country, and I'm going to jump to England and London. And let's just hear a little bit about what has happened in London. It was reported in the Guardian newspaper in January this year that Jobbik, whose leader, Gabor Vona, has been described as one of Europe's most electorally successful fascists, held a rally in Hyde Park in London for Jobbik sympathisers, Jobbik party sympathisers. And I have to ask, what was Jobbik doing in London? So the rally which was timed intentionally to be on the eve of the Holocaust Remembrance Day, went ahead despite attempts by anti-fascism groups and leading Jewish organisations to have Vona's visit to UK blocked by the Home Office. So in effect, Jobbik had carte blanche to do what they wanted and to raise awareness for whatever cause they wanted in London, in UK. Now, that's London. Now we have, of course, we have the Ukraine, and you may be aware of what has happened during 2014 in the Ukraine. The uprising there was actually started by the extreme right-wing party in the Ukraine. It has now been, other parties have joined, it's been hijacked by other influences, but it was started by the right-wing, the extreme right-wing. You can see that across Europe there have been huge influences, a huge move to the political right, which always indicates a move towards anti-Semitism. The two go hand in hand. Now, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about a couple of surveys that really look into this issue of, is anti-Semitism increasing, or what is happening around the world in terms of that? Why am I talking about that when I talk about my book? The reason is, as you will hear later, that Jane Haining, who is the person I wrote about, was drawn to Hungary for her life's work because she heard about the level of anti-Semitism, the way the Jews were being treated in Hungary. Now, there was a survey done by the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, and this came out in October 2013. They surveyed 5,100 Jews in 9 European countries. They found that 22% of the Jews said they would avoid visiting any places or wearing any symbols that would identify them as Jews. Now, if those who have heard the news of the 4 people who were murdered in the Brussels Jewish Museum in April 2014, they will well understand why the Jewish people, 22% of them, would feel this way. Now, in the survey, it also showed that 91% of the 500 Hungarian Jews surveyed said they saw anti-Semitism rising in the last 5 years in Hungary, and 30% of those people actually had experienced it in some way themselves in their own personal lives. Another quite scary statistic that came out of the survey was that 75% of the Jews who were interviewed said that they didn't report any incidences of anti-Semitism because it wasn't worth it. In other words, they felt there was nothing was going to be done. There was no way of counteracting what was happening, and there was no point, therefore, in reporting it. Now, I have one other survey I want to mention, which is very important to this whole topic, and that is a survey that was done by the Anti-Defamation League. They did that in May. It was put out in May this year, 2014, and it was reported by the Times of Israel and in many other places. Now, a few statistics from that. First of all, they interviewed 53,000 people from around the world, from 102 countries. So a very broad survey, not just Jews, Gentiles, generally 53,000 people, a cross-section of populations. Some findings. They found that 26% of those interviewed harbored what they described as deeply anti-Semitic feelings. Now, 70% of those people who demonstrated anti-Semitic feelings, 76% had never, ever met a Jew. They had no personal experience of Jews. Another statistic from that was that 35% of the people who were interviewed said they had never, ever heard of the Holocaust. Now, that surely is a shocking statement, and that is what the survey showed. Now, the spokesman for the Anti-Defamation League said a very important comment afterwards. He said, "For the first time, we have a real sense of the pervasive and persistent anti-Semitism that is existing around the world." It's now 70 years since Jane Haining died. She died in Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, and I will tell you a little of her story in a minute. It's now 70 years since she died. Why? I have a question. Why has this story waited for 70 years before being told? And the only thing I can say to that is that I feel it has been waiting for such a time as this. As you've just heard, as I've taken you on a tour around Europe, anti-Semitism, right-wing nationalism is very much on the increase, and it is looking a little bit similar to the way things were in the 1930s in Europe, in Germany, and some other countries. So now we have a story about somebody who stood up in a situation in World War II against what was happening there. And my other question is, why would I be telling this story? I'm a New Zealand journalist, And I'm not Hungarian, but I'll explain, because this lady is actually a distant relative of mine, and I found out about the story because my mother, who before she died in 2005, gave me a little booklet, which is here, called Jane Haining of Budapest, a very small booklet, very little information in it. And she asked me to read it. She said, "This is a relative of ours, you should read it." I did, eventually, and when I read the story, it touched my heart. I could not put it down. I read it and reread it and reread it, and I felt very, very a part of that story. I felt very attached to the lady in the story, Jane Haining. And I knew within myself that I needed to tell this story in full. This booklet is very small, very little information. It did not show who this lady really was and why she would do what she did. I was also, as a Christian, as a believer, I was also given prophetic words. I was given some powerful prophetic words from the Bible, and I understood, I think, God's heart for the Jewish people and his love for the Jewish people. I felt that was revealed to me, and I felt a very strong call for that reason to tell this story, because this story was really speaking a very, very important truth to the world today, a very needed truth to the world today. So I was given a scripture from Isaiah 45, 2-3, which God promises Israel to level the hills before Israel as it goes ahead, to smash the iron bars and to smash the bronze gates, and to reveal something that was hidden in the dark, in a secret place. And that scripture spoke very deeply to me, and I knew that I must get up and I must go and I must walk in this lady's, Jane Haining's, footsteps and discover what her life was all really about, what the story was really about, who this lady was, how she could do what she did do, and what that means for us today, why the story is suddenly becoming important today. So I set off on a journey. I booked a round-the-world ticket. I was doing this on a shoestring budget. I booked a round-the-world ticket, and off I went to walk in Jane Haining's footsteps. Now, I'm going to tell you, first of all, a little bit of her life story, very briefly, what her story is about and why it really absorbed my attention the way it did. Jane Haining was born in a small village, Dunscore, in Scotland in 1897. She was the daughter of a family who were moderately well off, and she lived on a small farm very comfortably. She had a good life. Her family were a family of great faith. They attended church every Sunday, and I do believe that Jane Haining had a very deep relationship and faith in God even from an early age. She was a very bright young girl, and when she went to the primary school in Dunscore village, a very tiny school. Jane was a very, very bright student academically, and she actually got a scholarship from the little school in Dunscore to go to a very prestigious secondary school, Dumfries Academy, in Dumfries town, which is quite close to her village. The Dumfries Academy is well known as being the school that J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, attended, and many other famous writers and politicians, etc. Now, it might sound that Jane's life was very good, and in some ways it was, but in other ways it was actually very sad, because when Jane was 5 years old, her mother died in childbirth, and the baby sister who was born, Helen, died 18 months later. Now, so from a very young age, Jane knew what it was like, the grief of losing a mother. For a 5-year-old, that is very traumatic. It was a terrible thing. And she had learnt what it felt like to be grieving and having lost somebody very close to her. Now, this, in a way, prepared Jane very, very well, this experience, to understand in later years what she was going to be dealing with when she went to Hungary and lived with and looked after children who were losing their parents before and during World War II. So she was, in a special way, she was really equipped to face the situation and to empathise and understand these children. her father died when she was about 20, so she became an orphan herself, actually, as she got a little bit older. Jane finished school, and of course, being a very adept student, she was actually Dux, which in some cultures, they don't know what that is. That means that she won the top academic prize at the Dumfries Academy, and then moved on in 1915, and moved on to find what she should do with the rest of her life. Now, this was war years, World War I, and at that stage, there were not a lot of opportunities for young women. She would be able perhaps to be a teacher or a nurse or work in an office or perhaps go back and help Dad on the farm. Well, Jane chose, after a short while on the farm with her father, to become a office worker in Glasgow, in Scotland. Because she was so adept, she started off as a secretary and after a very short time had progressed to become the personal assistant to the manager of the company. Now, Jane, for those days, she had a very good job, she had a very good career ahead of her, and yet there must have been something within Jane that told her there was more to life than this. There was a calling on her life. She had something deep within her that told her that this wasn't all that life was about. Now, something very important happened for Jane in 1927. She'd been working for some years now, and she attended a meeting that the Church of Scotland had put on in Glasgow, and there was a speaker coming to that meeting. Now, Jane went to the meeting knowing nothing about it. She went because a friend had invited her, and she thought, I'll go. I don't want them to feel there's no one in the audience. I'll go too. She listened to the speaker, and she was aghast. She was horrified at what the speaker was describing. He was talking about a people group in Europe who were being discriminated against extremely harshly. She had never heard of this people group before, and she was shocked. This people group, of course, was the Jews. She came out of that meeting, and at the end of it, she turned to her friend and said something very significant. She said, I have found my life's work. Now, she didn't say, I'm going to go to Hungary and help out a little bit for a few years. She said, I have found my life's work. And she meant it. She had made there and then a commitment to go and make the service to the Jewish people, helping the Jewish people, her life's whole and complete goal. Now, Jane needed to find a way to get to Central Europe, to find a position where she could fulfill her destiny as she understood it. And very shortly after, the Church of Scotland magazine Life and Work ran an advertisement. They were asking for somebody to come to be a matron in the girls' home in their mission in Budapest, in Hungary. Now, the mission in Hungary had been there for many, many years, near to 100 years already. The Church of Scotland had a proud history of serving the Jewish people in Europe, and particularly in Eastern Europe and in Hungary, through their mission that they had established. The mission consisted of a girls' school for girls from about 6 to 16 years old, and also a girls' home, which was established on the 3rd floor of that school in Budapest. And Jane was to succeed when she applied for the job as matron. In other words, she was to head up the administration and of that girls' home on the 3rd floor in the Vörösmarty school. Jane moved to Budapest in 1932, being very bright and being very good at languages. Within 2 years, she was apparently fluent in Hungarian, which is one of the most difficult languages to learn in Europe. And she became very, very involved in the mission, in what the Church of Scotland was trying to do in Budapest with the mission and the Jewish children. The mission actually had Hungarian children as well as Jewish children, so it was a mixed group in the mission. The government of that time would not have allowed a purely Jewish mission to exist in the country, but as the years moved on towards war years, more and more of the children in the mission were Jewish. And there was a reason. You might say, why would Jewish people come to a Christian mission school? Why didn't they go to a Jewish school or a state school or whatever? And there was a very good reason, two very good reasons for that. The first reason was that the school had a very, very high academic standard, and the Jewish people really looked forward and appreciated that. The second reason was a very, even more important reason as time went on, and that was that the Jewish families, the Jewish children, felt that they were not discriminated against in this mission school, that they were protected, they felt safe. Now, in Hungary, for centuries, in fact, there have been periods of time when there's been a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of discrimination against the Jewish population, which has always been quite high in Hungary. And so there have been times, good times and bad times for the Jewish population there. And of course in the 1930s the things were progressing in Nazi Germany and across Europe and Eastern Europe to become more and more difficult for the Jewish people. So of course more of them sought the safety of the mission. Now, Jane was there and worked extremely hard. As the years went on towards the war years, things got more difficult. There was scarcity of food, etc. She would be up at 4 o'clock in the morning going to the market to buy food for the hostel, for the girls' home. She would be awake till 12 o'clock at night. And there were many things for her to do in between times. And she was not only administrator, it's important to understand, she was like a mother to the children. As years went on and Jewish children, their fathers might go missing, their mothers might have to work 12, 13 hours a day to just bring in a small income for the family, otherwise they would starve. And they couldn't look after their children. There were divorces, there were all sorts of situations, family breakdowns. Those children came into the girls' home and Jane took them under her wing as a mother would. And she became a very important figure to them. Now in 1939, World War II broke out, and as many of you will be aware, Germany, of course, was fighting against United Kingdom. And by about 1941, Hungary had joined in on Germany's side as part of the Axis powers. This meant that Jane was now in enemy territory, which raised some concerns in England and in the Church of Scotland. Before that, in 1940, the Church of Scotland realised that there was a very serious problem. They couldn't keep good enough contact with good enough oversight on the mission in Budapest, and so they asked all their missionaries to go home. There were a number of missionaries besides Jane there. Jane received 3 commands from the Church of Scotland to go home. The other missionaries all left. 3 times Jane refused. She said, if the children needed me in times of sunshine, how much more do they need me in times of darkness? In other words, they need me now more than ever. I'm not going, I'm staying. And she stayed. And to just briefly give you the end of the story, so you can see just how heroic this woman's life was, she continued working there under very, very extremely difficult conditions. And in 1944, Germany invaded Hungary. Jane was still there. She could have gone, she could have got away. There were neutral embassies that could have got her out of Hungary, but she stayed. About 2 months after the Germans invaded Hungary, 2 Gestapo officers turned up and knocked on her door, and on the door of the mission, and they arrested her, gave her 15 minutes to pack, and they took her off to a prison. Normally, many foreigners were being arrested at that time. They would be accused of spying for Britain, put in prison or shipped off over the border. But no, not with Jane. In her case, what they did was they sent her on a transport, along with many Jewish and Roma people, to Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. She was actually sent to the Birkenau part, which was the extermination camp, because between 50 and 80% of people who went on the transports, on the trains to those camps, were sent straight to the gas chambers. Jane obviously was credited with enough strength and health to be of use to the Germans, and she was not sent straight to the gas chambers. She survived for 2 months. She must have had to work in some capacity. Very little is known about this stage of her life, but 2 months later, she died in Auschwitz. She died as a martyr for the children in Hungary that she had sacrificed her life for. This is a very, very powerful story, and this is a story that gripped me as I read that little booklet. Now, I knew I had to go. I went on my journey. I was going to walk that path that Jane had walked. And I just want to share with you a few of the little moments, the God incidences is all I can call it, of my journey to research that book and to research that story and to understand who this lady was and why did she do this. So I left New Zealand and I went to Scotland. I didn't know who to contact. I knew where to go. I knew to go to Scotland and Budapest and Auschwitz, of course, but I didn't know who to contact. And Jane Haining was not a very outgoing person. She was very forthright, but she was not a person who would put herself out into the public domain. She did not leave a paper trail. She did not write a lot of letters to her family. She did not leave a lot of personal information about herself. So I had to dig deep to find who she was and what the story was really about. So I went to Dumfries, where Jane had gone to school, and I thought, well, who do I talk to? Nobody has actually heard about Jane Haining. Then I thought, well, I'm a journalist, so I will just go to the local newspaper. They will know something about her. They'll know who I should talk to. And sure enough, it just so happened that a former editor of the Dumfries paper was a history buff, and he had studied a little bit about the early part of Jane Haining's life. So he took me to Dunscore Village and showed me various bits and pieces, introduced me to one or two other people who knew a little bit about her, and I gleaned some early facts of Jane's early life. My next step had to be Glasgow, where Jane went to work. And it just so happened that the secretary of Queen's Park Church, where Jane worshipped, had also taken an interest in Jane's life, and she filled me in on some of Jane's activities and what she did, who she was in terms of the church and the church life in Glasgow. It was just like I was finding everywhere I went somebody who had a little piece of the jigsaw puzzle to put in place for me so that I could tell this story. My next stop had to be in Edinburgh, where Jane trained for a short while to go as a missionary to Budapest. And I thought, well, obviously I will go to the Church of Scotland headquarters and they will have a nice big archive about this missionary that they sent out in 1932. I asked for the archive. They brought me a small shoebox. That was it, with a few photos and a few minutes from the World Mission Council Jewish Committee meetings that oversaw the Vörösmarty mission in Budapest. So I then went to the National Library of Scotland, same thing. I asked for an archive and they brought out a little box, not a little box this time, they brought out a small folder, and that was it. They had a little bit. So a little bit more of Jane's life, a few more bits of the jigsaw puzzle. My next stop, of course, had to be Budapest in Hungary. And I got there and I booked myself into a hostel. I didn't know anything about Budapest. It's a big city, about 2.5 million people. I booked into a hostel somewhere in the middle, and it just so happened that where I stayed was just around the corner and down the road from the very place where the mission had been. And in fact, the school is still there. It's now a state school because the communists took over Hungary and nationalised all the schooling. So the school is no longer part of the Church of Scotland mission. It is a state school, but it's still there. And so, of course, I went to the school and asked. They knew a little bit. They had some photos on the wall, but they didn't have a lot of information more than I already knew. And then I thought, who else can I ask? Because you see, no one in Hungary, virtually no one knew who she was. This story had been hidden for 70 years. She was not known, even despite what she'd done. So I thought, all right, I will go to the church right next door to the school. It's called St. Columba's Church, and it is still part of the Church of Scotland, and they hold their services in English. I went along to the church on the Sunday to a service, and it just so happened that there was a lady there called Judith Meseros, and she had an interest in Jane Haining. She had wanted to make a DVD of her life at one stage and had given up, but she knew a man who had some testimonies from past students and teachers who had been at the mission school at the same time as Jane Haining. Now this was amazing because these were collected in 1985 for a commemoration in the church, and so they were much more current than anything I could have collected today from any survivors. They were written so much more close to the event, so they would be so much more accurate in memories and in detail. And the best thing of all was they were all written in English, so I could read them. So I had something extremely valuable there. I had some impressions from people who actually knew Jane Haining firsthand about what sort of person she was. And the way they painted her was that she was a person of very strict, very forthright, but also extremely, extremely loving and kind. And they felt, most of all, they felt safe with her. That was the biggest thing for them in that time of great unsafety for all the Jewish children. So I now had a picture of Jane in Budapest. My last stop, obviously, had to be to go to Auschwitz and Auschwitz-Birkenau, and that's in Poland. And you can catch a night train from Budapest up to Krakow, the city nearest to the camp. And so, because Jane had gone by train, I thought I most certainly must also go by train. A very different sort of train, of course. It was the worst winter in Europe in 40 years. The snow was everywhere. The trains were being rerouted and blocked, and I really didn't know whether I would get to Krakow that night. I took a night train. We did get there eventually, about 3 hours late. And when I arrived in Krakow, I got off the train, I put on all my clothes that I brought with me. I had 5 layers on, and my coat and my hat and my gloves and my scarf. It was negative 15 degrees. Very, very cold. I knew that I could not take a bus, a public bus or public train to Auschwitz-Birkenau, or I would be another Auschwitz statistic frozen on the spot at the bus stop. That wasn't going to happen. And I only had 12 hours. I'd allowed myself only 12 hours to go to Auschwitz, to look around, to find out what I could. And then the next night I was taking the train back to Budapest. I had something else I had to do after that. So I I looked around for an information office because I needed a tour bus, clearly, to go to Auschwitz. And I knew they did have tours to Auschwitz. The information office on the railway station was closed, even though it was supposed to be open. So I started walking downtown. And as I walked downtown, I noticed a man come walking alongside me, catching up with me on the footpath and coming alongside me. I looked in his hand, and in his hand, he had a bunch of leaflets. These leaflets, maybe you can guess what they were. They were bus tours to Auschwitz. I looked at them and I thought, this is exactly what I want. I felt very much that God was leading me. I felt that I was being provided for, as I had been throughout this journey so far, and that this was an extraordinary provision. So I signaled to him to give me a leaflet, which he did, and then he beckoned me like this. And of course, all my viewers know that you don't follow somebody in a strange country who you can't communicate with because he spoke Polish, I spoke English, and I was by myself. You don't follow such a person, do you? But I felt definitely that this was God's provision. I followed him, and he took me a couple of blocks away and over a couple of blocks to a bus tour office. Outside the bus tour office, there was a bus waiting. It was leaving in 15 minutes to Auschwitz, and it was the only bus going that day. So it was that or nothing, and I had been led to the bus in time. So I got my day at Auschwitz, and I found out as much as I could. Of course, the Germans didn't reveal a lot about what happened to their various inmates in Auschwitz. So I gleaned what I could there. I returned back to Budapest by train. My adventures weren't quite finished because the train caught fire on the way back to Budapest. And there was smoke billowing through our carriage, and then the two conductors ran through with their fire extinguishers. Apparently, the Hungarians were blaming the Polish for not checking the brakes before we left Krakow, and the brakes had overheated and caught fire. There was a big argument for about half an hour about whether the train could do the rest of the journey or not, and they decided finally we could, and we arrived back in Budapest about 3 hours late, but we got there. Now, I had done everything I felt called to do. I had walked in Jane Haining's footsteps, so what to do now? Go home to New Zealand and write the story, which I did very quickly in about 3 months because I felt the whole story just flow out of me. I had absorbed the atmosphere of the places Jane had been. I had just felt what it was like and imagined what it was like for her and learnt about who she was. And so I had what I felt I needed to just write the story, and I did. Now, that might have been the end of the story. Of course, you find a publisher, etc., but it wasn't. In fact, that was almost, though I didn't realize it, it was really the beginning of the story, because some very significant things happened after that. In October of 2010, something very significant happened in Budapest. The Jewish community there, who had up till this time been aware of Jane Haining's story but not really willing to acknowledge what she'd done, they did say, oh, she was a missionary, she came to convert us, so we don't want to know about her. And this, of course, was not true, and I need to stress that the mission, the Church of Scotland mission to Budapest was not there to convert Jews to Christianity. Once a Jew, always a Jew. That God has never said in his Bible that the Jews were to change from being Jews to being something else. They were always to be Jews. And Jane Haining knew this. And the Church of Scotland understood the mission to be that they were to guide the Jewish children and the Jewish and their families back to their own scriptures, to their own Tanakh, to their own Torah, to their own scriptures, where they would find their own God, which just so happens to be the Christian God as well. And that the Church of Scotland missionaries were to, as well as guiding them back to their own God, was to love them with the love that Jesus filled them with, so that they would be the hands and feet, if you like, of Jesus to these Jewish people who would find the truth in their own scriptures. And this was an extremely successful way, because the Jewish people felt respected, they felt honoured in the way that they should be as God's chosen people. So that was the standing of the mission. Now, many Jewish people were not really, since then, the Jewish people at that time did understand, and they flocked to the mission. But since then, generations since then, have not really understood that, and in other countries also not understood. And so in 2010, I was amazed to discover that the Jewish people in Budapest had decided that they would honour Jane Haining in a special commemoration in their own community centre. They invited me over, I went over there, and that was a wonderful experience. And it was a breakthrough, because the Jewish people were opening their hearts to a Christian who had come to serve them, and as it happens, sacrifice her life for them. Very important. And so while I was over there, so that was great, but while I was over there, something else amazing happened. The pastor of St. Columba's Church decided, for some reason, to look in a very old safe that was in the wall of the church and had been there since about the war years. He looked under some papers and he found 2 books. And those 2 books were, first of all, he phoned me and said, I've got something very exciting to show you, I'm bringing it over. And when he arrived, he had these 2 books. One was Jane Haining's Bible, and the other was a book that she had received as a prize in Dumfries Academy, because she won a lot of academic prizes. Now, the interesting thing was the Bible, because there was a rumour that when Jane was arrested, that she held the Bible in her hand, that a Gestapo officer tore it from her hand, threw it down, and said, you won't need that where you're going. And we don't know if that's true. But the fact of the matter is that Bible disappeared, and nobody knew where it was until 2010, when Pastor Aaron Stevens looked in the safe and found it. And I remembered back to the scripture that I'd been given, Isaiah 45, 2-3, where God promised that I would find secrets hidden in dark places. That was an amazing thing. Now, the story goes on because in 2010 something else happened in Hungary, which was amazing. The government, or the council in Budapest, the city council, decided to rename some streets. And these streets were, they were going to be renamed after some of what we call the righteous among the nations. Now, the righteous among the nations are a group of people that Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem have named. It's Yad Vashem's top award. They have named these people as being worthy of a special honor for helping the Jews in times of crisis, such as the World War II and the Holocaust. Jane Haining had received that award in 1997. Now, the council was naming the streets after some of these people. But you know, there are many, many people in Hungary, who were in Hungary, who have got this award, the Righteous Among the Nations Award, and many famous ones like Raoul Wallenberg and Karl Lutz and many others. And I was absolutely astonished to discover that they had named the main part of an embankment right beside the Danube where many, many tourists go, Jane Haining Rakpart, which means Jane Haining Embankment. Well, that's amazing because nobody in Budapest knew who she was. They all knew Karl Lutz, they all knew Raoul Wallenberg and many other names. No one knew Jane Haining, so why would they name that important street after her? That to me was an amazing thing, and I really could only say it was a God thing, because people will look at it and say, who was Jane Haining? And then, of course, we can tell her story, can't we? The story of her sacrifice for the Jewish people. So that was truly amazing. Some other amazing things actually have happened there as well. In 2012, the government in Hungary decided that 2014 would be a whole year of commemoration of the Holocaust, because 2014 is 70 years since what they call the Great Transportations, when they took the largest number of Jews by train in 2 months out of Hungary, the largest number of anywhere in Europe in that short amount of time, to Auschwitz-Birkenau. So they're commemorating the whole of 2014 was to be a year of commemoration, and they would provide funding for the for events, for DVDs to be made, etc. Now that's an amazing thing, because from my experiences in Hungary and from what I learned about Hungary, Hungary has been basically in denial of what truly happened during the World War II years, ever since the war. A walking guide told me, and he put it very succinctly, and I think and very simply, he said the Russians, when they came in, they blamed the Hungarians for what had happened. The Hungarians blamed the Germans. The Germans had no one to blame. The buck stopped with the Germans. The actual truth was that the Hungarian, a certain percentage of the Hungarian population, and it was a large percentage, collaborated with the Germans, and there was a group in Hungary called the Neolás, which is the Arrow Cross Party, who actually took over the political power in Hungary by 1944 and a bit earlier, who were doing as many atrocities or more than the Germans were in Hungary. So the truth about that period in history is a very dark truth for Hungary. And to have the government being prepared to commemorate those years was a very dangerous thing politically for them to do. And as it has turned out, as we're in 2014 now, there's been a lot of friction, an extremely fraught political situation in the country because of this, because there are sections in the population in Hungary who do not want the truth to be told. And there are many young people in Hungary who do not even know that the Holocaust happened in their country. They have not been told because it was easier to either whitewash that period or simply not tell the full details of it. There is an enormous lot going on in Hungary at this time, and I have a friend who works in Hungary, Andrea Simonyi, who belongs to a group called Fountains of Hope, and they are working in the area of reconciliation between the Jewish population there and the church, because unfortunately many of the people in the higher echelons of the traditional church in Hungary were collaborators in the war, and also, of course, the secular population. Now, what has all this got to do with my book and with Jane Haining? Well, actually, this group, Fountains of Hope, have discovered that this book is actually telling the story. What they're trying to do, it's telling the story almost better than they can. Their purpose is to educate the people about what actually happened, but it's a little bit more than that. They're trying to bring the population to a place of reconciliation through acknowledging the past, not just knowing about it, acknowledging it. Of course, the church needs to repent of what happened in the past. The Jewish people need to forgive what was done to them. At that point, we can see true reconciliation happen, and it is a huge process, and it is not a matter of just educating people to know about the past. If you leave it there, you're dealing with matters of the head only, and if you really want reconciliation, that's a matter of the heart. So you must move past the head to the heart, and this book actually does just that. And I'll just read a quote from Andrea when she'd read Jane's story. She said this: Jane's life is the ultimate example of what we, with all our efforts, are trying to show, what Jesus meant by love, what love really looks like. Jane's life shows what love really looks like. This is what we are trying to show the people, that there is something different that can exist other than anti-Semitism, discrimination, murder, and etc., the things that have come out of that. So I describe Jane's story as, if you like, an antidote to anti-Semitism, because it is telling a redemptive story. It's telling a story of somebody giving their life because of love, not taking someone's life because of hatred. It's telling the opposite story, and it is a very, very important story. I must say that in Hungary now, because of the rise in anti-Semitism and the right-wing party power, etc., people across the board are becoming more and more concerned. In April this year, when I was there was a rally, if you like, called March of the Living, which is organised by a German Jobsbittner, and it's a march of as many people who want to take part in it, commemorating the death marches that were conducted by the Germans out of the concentration camps at the end of the war, where most people died. These marches, people are living, but they're commemorating those who died, and it's a powerful statement that we will not forget, that we will march, and we will be the living to replace those dead people. Now, this year in Budapest, there were 25,000 people attended that march. 2 years ago, 10,000. So the people who attended were not all Jewish. In fact, there were many secular people, there were many Christian people, and they were bonded together to make this statement that, if you like, enough is enough, that we do not want to return to the pre-war years and the war years of discrimination, of basically terrorism and anti-Semitism, that we want to stand up and make a statement about this, about what we feel, which is very important. Now, that is all very important for Hungary, and it's not finished there either, because in October in 2014, my book is going to be published in Hungarian, in Hungary, and by one of the second largest publishers, and it is going to be launched there at the end of October, along with a DVD that someone's made, and it's going to that's going to be on national television, etc. So it is just amazing how Jane's story has gone from being unknown for 70 years to suddenly coming to light. It's just phenomenal, and the effect that it's having on people. Now, I want to just give you a little description of one person who was deeply affected by Jane's story. And this was a lady that I met in April this year, in 2014 in April. I was in Budapest, and this lady, whose name is Eva, came to see me in my apartment, and she had 3 questions for me. She was a Jewish lady who we call Messianic Jewish. She knows Yeshua or Jesus as her Lord, but she is fully Jewish. She abides by all the Jewish customs. And she had 3 questions. The first one, because she knew about the story of Jane Haining, and this is what everybody asks, in particular Jews, why did Jane do it? Why did Jane stay in Hungary when she could have escaped with her life and maybe come back and help the Jews after the war or something like that? And I thought about it, and I answered this lady and said, well, actually, Jane did this because she had a very deep faith in God. And not only that, she knew the heart of God. She knew the heart of God. She had a close relationship with God. And she knew that God's heart is a heart full of love for the Jewish people, that God is turning his heart back towards the Jewish people. And Jane, if she was a true person of faith, must share the heart of God. So she must also love the Jewish people. So she understood what her role was there, what God was calling her to do, but it wasn't a duty, it was a love. It was a love thing. And the second question, and Eva thought, oh, okay, that explains it. That was okay for her. The second question, getting a little bit harder, why did the Jews have to die in the Holocaust? Why weren't they just, injured or just imprisoned? And where was God during the Holocaust? Now that is a very difficult question to answer. And I had great difficulty, of course. And I did say, well, Eva, you know your scriptures, the Torah, and it gives a picture of the Jews turning away from God, God punishing them or allowing them to have the consequences of their turning away, if you like, but waiting with open arms to welcome them back, always a loving God, welcoming them, calling them back to himself. And that is a continual picture. It's like a circle going around that's played out throughout Jewish history. And this is part of that circle, perhaps. But that didn't really satisfy her. She wanted something deeper than that. Why couldn't they just be punished? Why did they die? Where was God? Why did he allow this? And so many Jewish people will say, if there is a God and he allowed the Holocaust, I don't want to know that God. Well, the only answer I could have to that was a prophecy that the Lord put on my heart. It was, if you like, a word or an idea that was dropped into my heart, into my spirit, before I went on this journey to write the book. And this word was very powerful. It was so powerful that sometimes I would weep as I tried to tell people what it was. It was really God telling me how much he loved the Jewish people. He loved his sons and his daughters, he said. He loved them, and he weeps for them as and just as he bled on the cross for his people. He dropped into my heart that he did not ignore the Jewish people in their time of trouble, in their darkest hour. He didn't desert them. He actually went into the gas chambers with them, and he went in the person of people like Jane Haining, who went there because of their love for the Jewish people. They went there as examples of what God's feeling was for the Jewish people. They were, if you like, they were Jesus with skin on, you can say. They were people who showed by their actions what God's heart was for these people, for these Jewish people. And Eva read this word, this thing I'd written down some months before, and she reread it, and she reread it, and I knew something was happening inside her. She then came with the third question. Now, Eva had been born in 1944, and she and her mother were the only survivors in her whole family of World War II. The others were all killed. She asked me, why did I survive when the rest of my family, except my mother, all died? Why did I survive? For most people who've been through a traumatic situation where other people have died, they hold a burden of guilt about why they survived when others didn't. And that's very common, and it often lasts for the whole of the person's life. Now, I really didn't have an answer for this. I don't know if any of you people would have an answer, but I had no useful answer. All I could say rather weakly was, I don't know why the others died and you didn't. God knows, but I don't know. And of course that wasn't satisfying, was it? And then she looked at me, she sat and she looked at me and she had a revelation and she said this. She said, Jane would have wanted me to live. And something happened inside her, I could see it happening. And she said, she wanted me to live. And you know, that woman, Eva, had what I would call an inner healing from the wounding of the war years and what had happened to her family. I saw her 2 days later, 2 consecutive days later, and she was a changed person. She looked 20 years younger. She had a bright smile on her face. She was a different person. She had received an inner healing by a revelation of what love really looked like, and that is what she needed. So if my story or Jane's story can do that for one person, surely it was worth the telling, wasn't it? Now, I just want to summarize and just say one thing, which I say to all people that I talk to across the board, and that is that there is, in terms of what Jane Haining stood up against, and remember Jane stood where many others didn't, there is no fence to sit on. There is no fence. If you get picture in your mind a picture of Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, there is a fence around the outside. That fence is actually part of the camp. The camp is a problem. The fence is part of the problem. We are either part of the solution or we are part of the problem. And it is for every person to in their hearts to decide where they stand. There is no fence. You cannot say, I'm away in a distant country. I don't know any Jews. It's not my issue. That's sitting on the fence. If you're sitting on the fence, yeah, you're part of the problem. So the last thing I want to say is that I often wondered why people, when they read my book, would have a little weep and cry a little. I know it's a little sad because she dies at the end, but I don't include a lot of nasty stuff in it about Auschwitz, etc. And I've come to the realization that it's not about informing people about facts and figures, etc. That really does not a lot of good in changing what will happen or the state of our country or whatever, or our family. It's actually the heart that matters. And Jane Haining's story speaks to the heart. Thank you very much for listening.